Which of these emotions are welcomed at the divorce table? All of them, because your emotions are worthy, and so are you. Thank you for joining me for this inaugural season of Worthy Emotions podcast. Today is episode 2 in this inaugural season, and I can't wait to introduce you to my guests. Now, my guest today is Attorney Meredith Brennan, a family law attorney at Mamjian Anderer in Philadelphia. Meredith comes with many accolades, many accomplishments, and she's been practicing divorce law and family law for over 20 years. Ready for the fun fact? Attorney Meredith Brennan was my divorce attorney when I was going through divorce and custody issues. She was the one that helped me understand that there was another way to go through the divorce process, and it wasn't just in the courts. She introduced me to arbitration and mediation. She'll talk a little bit about that when you meet her shortly. Now, what I want you to do is gather a friend or two around and watch this episode together, and then share it with someone else, because what you're going to learn today and in this entire inaugural season is a lot of nuggets, wisdom, and insight about how divorce can be a little bit more amicable and manageable when we come from an emotional intelligence perspective. Here's my interview with family law attorney Meredith Brennan. Welcome, Attorney Meredith Brennan. I am so excited that you are my guest on this new thing I'm doing called Worthy Emotions Podcast. I was so delighted when you accepted the invitation to be my guest. And I want everyone to know that you were the difference maker for me. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in our conversation. But I just want to straight out thank you for being who you were during my divorce that happened 13 years ago.
Thank you. It's great to speak with you and learn that you put your own experience with your divorce to such a productive use, although that's no surprise because you were very emotionally in tune throughout that whole process. I often say to clients like you, I wish I could just sit you in my lobby for people who are coming through and just starting the process so that you can say, you can get through this.
Yes. Wow. That's powerful. You gave me chills on that. Divorce is one of the most emotionally charged events a family can experience, and I know it firsthand. Research shows that unmanaged emotions can make divorce longer, more expensive, more painful for everyone involved, especially the children. When attorneys bring both advocacy and emotional awareness to their work, Meredith, it changes the process for the better. Like I said, you were my attorney during my divorce, so I know firsthand how you balance professionalism with compassion. From your perspective, how do emotions show up in litigation, and how do they affect both the process and the outcomes for families? And Meredith, if you will, for those who are listening and don't know what really the term litigation means, could you just first give a brief 5th grade level definition of it and then address the question?
Sure. So litigation means we have to have a judge, usually a judge, decide a case if we can't agree on the financial issues, meaning how the assets are going to be divided, what support should be in place, or what custody arrangements should be in place. And as you know, there are other alternatives to that, which include mediation and arbitration if you can't just settle the case directly between the attorneys. So ideally, in a case, we never step foot in a courthouse, although that's not always possible. So sometimes we are in court and before they're hearing officers or judges. So then to answer your question, of course, rare is the case where emotions are not incredibly high, especially at the beginning of a case. Every great once in a while, we have that unicorn case where parties come in and they've already agreed to how the assets are going to be divided and don't even need a custody schedule, but that's not often the case. So my goal is to try to set reasonable expectations early on in the case for the client, both in terms of what the outcomes may be and what the process is going to entail and how long it can take, because it sometimes feels interminable.
Mhm.
So I try to early on figure out, to give them some goalposts so that they have at least a sense of where this is going to be without overwhelming someone and going through the entire process right in the first meeting.
That's very interesting because when you were handling my case, I remember very clearly that you suggested that we do arbitration. And I had no idea what that was because my expectation, as I believe it's the expectation of many, is we're going to court and we're going to fight it out. But you brought that first as an alternative. And I'm just curious, what made you select arbitration or offer arbitration as a way to go versus just going to battle it out in court? Was there something unique about my case, or that's how you usually start with an alternative dispute resolution? What made the difference?
I often recommend arbitration if it looks like we're not going to be able to settle the case, but there do have to be some particular aspects of a case. First of all, both parties have to agree. So both parties have to at least be, in theory, more settlement oriented and not out for a pound of flesh or looking for their day in court, which again, where is the client who comes out of a courthouse feeling victorious? It's not the process that most people expect, where they're essentially just trying to get through as many cases in a day as opposed to vindicating personal wrongs. It's also somewhat counterintuitive to people to say we're going to pay yet a third attorney to get involved in our case, but it does tend to be much less expensive because it's a much more efficient and quick process.
Yeah, than battling it out in court. And we did arbitration, and then somewhere along the yellow brick road of the divorce process, we went into mediation, and somewhere along litigation.
And that's not uncommon because, unfortunately, at least in Pennsylvania, the practice is very fragmented and everything goes on different tracks. So custody could be going at a very slow pace in one track in front of one hearing officer. Support is going much more quickly in front of a completely different conference officer. And then you've got the division of assets that's way down the road. So to the extent that you can deal with these in a more contained situation and more holistically and systematically, it's much more efficient.
So most clients walk into divorce carrying fear, I know, and grief or anger or all of the above. In your experience, what's the most common emotion you see, and how does it affect how you represent your client?
I think the most common emotion is anger, but I will tell you why I will take an angry client over a sad client. The sad clients are really the hardest because they are not prepared to face the reality that the other party wants a divorce. And it's just very emotionally difficult to get someone over the sadness as opposed to the anger, which does typically wind up starting to dissipate as the case goes on. So I try to keep in mind, we take a lot of continuing legal education classes, and a number of them have focused on this trauma-based approach that lawyers and judges can employ, which is to really keep in mind that when I am first meeting with a client, it's often one of the worst days of their lives. They're not there because they need a will done. This is not a meeting that they want to have. So I try to keep that in mind and try to balance hearing what the person has to say and sometimes explaining in more detail what the circumstances are that led them there versus trying to extract the information I need regarding the finances, the custody situation, so that they can leave with at least some constructive information about what the process may look like. So especially that first meeting, I try to do more listening, although it has to be balanced with the idea that I'm not a psychologist and I'm not trained to be one nor qualified to be one.
And you probably don't want to be one either.
Well, or does the client want to get a bill for me listening sympathetically and nodding for where there are people far more qualified than I that can help them through this process? I also try to recommend, if a person is not in therapy already, that this is a good time to start and try to make sure that they have a support network in place, because this is a miserable process to go through alone. And if people have friends and family who are there, I mean, not necessarily physically there, although I do have plenty of cases where clients bring someone in and have a second set of ears, especially at that first meeting, because there are so many emotions going through. That makes a huge difference in getting through this process.
You said that you would rather take a client that is angry than a client that is sad. And it's really interesting that you made that distinction, because in the emotional intelligence world, emotions are energy, okay? And they have a frequency. And interestingly, we're all trying to rise to a higher level of energy. So there's a very low, like depression, all the way up to joy. Each emotion has a number or frequency. And we're always trying to rise higher. I mean, that's why we do all these crazy things to feel better. We want to feel better. We want to rise a little higher in emotional energy. You really do want someone who is angry over someone who's sad because they're at least a little bit higher on the frequency scale. Yeah, it's really quite interesting information about that. We, in the emotional intelligence world, we're always trying to help people move to a higher version of themselves, but it's always through a skill set. So we're teaching them to recognize how they feel so that they can then move to just a little bit higher on the frequency scale, because the higher you go, the easier the process is for you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I also like to try to inject whatever humor, especially gallows humor, in this process. And again, if someone is angry, sometimes they can receive that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about children and parenting. This is the place where I'm most motivated to do the work that I do. I have 4 children, and this was 13 years ago. So the youngest was 7 at the time. The oldest was 13 when I went through my divorce. They were very young. Your firm emphasizes building healthier futures for families. Can you share a story where emotions, either managed or unmanaged, directly shape the experience for the children?
Sure. So custody cases can obviously be some of the toughest. People want to spend as much time with their kids. They have very strong feelings about how parenting should happen and what the other parent's strengths and more often weaknesses are.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it can be really difficult because much of their identity is tied up in being a parent. When the other party comes in and says, okay, you've been a stay-at-home parent, but I can do everything you're doing just as well as you, that can be difficult because it is more and more common to have, if not equally shared custody, schedules that are very close to shared custody in many of our cases. So emotions are definitely high, opinions are very high.
Yeah.
I had another case involving a 10-year-old child, and the parties were in the process of a custody evaluation, which is where a psychologist comes in and meets with the children and the parents and does psychological testing. The evaluators found that the child had been coached to write journal entries. It just broke my heart to think of this kid writing these entries to please his father. So we see some certainly concerning behaviors where people are letting their emotions completely override any common sense about how to engage with their children.
You are describing for me a situation where there is one emotion that is running the show, and it's fear. The fear of not being loved by your child, not being preferred by your child, possibly being abandoned by your child, can make you do some crazy stuff. Fear is really a interesting emotion that drives us to do some unhelpful behaviors towards our children, always putting them in the middle.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is what was probably driving both of them.
What I think is often overlooked, which is that you are an attorney, but you're also a woman, a mother, a person, maybe a daughter still, a wife. So as an attorney, there's no way you are immune to emotions and the impact of your client's emotions on you. Can you recall a time when you felt your own emotions rising in a case and how you stayed grounded or didn't stay grounded while still advocating effectively? And then tag on to that, do you ever find yourself taking some of your client's stuff home? And I don't mean the documents you've got to read, but the weight of what they're going through.
Right. So family law is an incredibly stressful field of practice. And to answer your question, yes, both literally and figuratively, we take, our clients home with us. And in this day and age, obviously, people are, clients are emailing around the clock. Sometimes I'm getting, CC'd or BCC'd on, real-time communication, and it can be overwhelming. This is, an area that is just challenging for most people, but it's where we also need to balance this issue of when you are, an advocate versus trying to also be a counselor to people. And I say to clients, I have two jobs. One is to advocate for you, but two is to counsel you based on my judgment and experience and not just tell you you're right or argue any position that you come to me with. It is challenging because you feel so strongly. And, for some cases, these can go on for years and years, and people are telling you the most intimate things about their lives, and you feel strongly that you want to do best for them. I try, and I'm not always successful, to be at least a little bit more objective now. And when I was a young lawyer, I would write letters and say, your client did A, B, and C, as if I were an eyewitness and I was there in the house when all this was happening. Now I try to take a step back and say, my client reports that your client did A, B, and C. But also think about how would I feel if I got a letter ripping me to shreds? I know I'd be defensive and I wouldn't receive it well. And those letters generally just result in the other lawyer sending me a nasty letter telling me that my client did, D, E, and F. So I try to think of what productive solutions would be and how people will receive this. But, sometimes you do just have to document terrible behavior. So it is difficult, and it's certainly a issue in our line of work where attorneys are taking on these cases as if they are their own.
And you've been practicing for over 20 years, I believe, right?
Yes, 25.
So what keeps you in the game?
I always say it seemed like a good idea at the time I graduated law school. It is never dull. And there are some days that are just terrible where you feel like everybody's fighting and there's, at one step forward, two steps back. And then there's days where you feel like you actually helped a client, a child, got a good result or forced a client to see something a different way. So it's challenging, but also rewarding.
So emotional intelligence, by definition, is simply the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your emotions while also being able to recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. Okay, just as a simple definition. The ability meaning that it's a skill that you can develop, you can get better at as you give attention to it. And there are 5 areas that are measured in emotional intelligence, and we call them competencies. So we can measure how well you are at self-expression, how you express your emotions, self-perception, what you think about yourself, your interpersonal relationships, which is a big part, your ability to make good decisions where emotions are involved. And then the 5th is your ability to handle stress. And so all of those we measure initially. You get a score. We say, okay, here's how you measure compared to the general population in terms of the use of the skills of emotional intelligence in these 5 areas. And we can also see where someone is weak in those areas. So they may be very weak in stress management, which makes them go completely off the rails, but we can still find that. But when we know where they are weak, we can bolster that lower skill set, raise it so that they can perform better, not only in life, but particularly in the divorce process. So if your clients came already knowing their emotional intelligence score and having spent time raising that score in one of those 5 areas, what difference do you think that would make for them?
I think that would be a game changer. I think it'd be huge if people came in recognizing where they are and having skills to adapt, because it's a stressful process. But then there's also part 2, which is then living with whatever the custody arrangements are and realizing that someone else is going to be making parenting decisions that you may or may not agree with on the day-to-day things, and essentially how to let certain things go. So when we have many of the counties, we have parenting classes that the parties have to go to. And again, they have to go to these classes so early in the process. I'm guessing that a lot of it is in one ear and out the other, or, oh, I hope my, spouse understood all that and assumes that all the information, is directed to the other party. It would be really fascinating to think about having parties go through an emotional intelligence class or seminar to understand where they are and help them figure things out. Because a lot of the tips we give people are just it's like cognitive behavioral therapy. They call it the BIFF Method: brief, informative, friendly, and factual. And it's very specific conduct and tips as opposed to more holistically saying, how can I actually learn to live with this so that it's not affecting my whole life and able to be happy and have this not consume you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to switch gears now to two more segments of this podcast. This is one of my favorites. It's called Rapid Fire Answer Completion. Okay. So here's how it goes, Meredith. I'm going to start the statement, and your job is to finish it with the first thing that comes to mind. Are you ready to play? Okay. When I think about children in divorce, the word that comes to mind is
caught in between. I'll assume that's hyphenated.
That's good. All right. Second, when clients feel blank, they make the best decisions.
I'm going to say protected and informed.
Number three, the impact on attorneys if more parents practice emotional intelligence would be
life altering. Probably may make my job satisfaction much higher.
The biggest misunderstanding about divorce attorneys is
that we are all litigious.
Last, one lesson I've learned from my years of experience in family law is
that if you're not actually feeling it, just fake it. Try to get along, and it may actually result in you getting along with the other party.
Okay, so fake it till you make it.
Yes.
That's great. Those are great answers. All right. So we're coming to the close. I could talk to you all day on this. This has been so fun. So lastly, two more things before you go. Meredith, would you be willing to share a resource, a book, article, or even a perspective that you believe most divorcing parents don't know about, but should and can be helpful?
I actually just came across an article on the BBC's website by a writer named Molly Gorman called Gray Divorce, the Impact on Adult Children. And gray divorce is a term used for parties who are older, who are getting divorced. And I have a case now where the party's been married 40 plus years. The husband had a long-term affair, and the 3 adult children are just devastated by this. So it's not something we really think about. We think about younger kids and the custody orders, but there is certainly an impact on older adult children as well.
For sure. Thank you. That's a great resource, and I'll be sure to include that in the show notes. All right. This is the last segment. It is the signature segment or challenge for every podcast I do, and it's called Passing on One Word Emotion, and it's a challenge. So the previous guest, Meredith, not knowing you or that I would be interviewing you, left you a one-word emotion challenge. Now, after I play the clip, I'm going to ask you to answer his challenge. And then I'll explain how you'll do the same for the next guest coming in line after you. Okay? So Chris Pastore, he's an attorney mediator with Mainline Family Law Center, left you, Meredith, a one emotion word challenge. So I'm going to play the clip where he asks you the challenge question, and then we'll come back and you can answer it.
Yep.
All right, Chris, randomly choose an emotion from the top right or bottom right.
Okay, so we're staying on the right.
Yes.
I like the word balanced.
Okay, great. Frame the question for my future guests.
Okay.
That one word emotion.
Okay, so how can you, as a practitioner, help a client to be well balanced through the process?
Okay. He put out a challenge to you.
Okay. So I would say keeping clients informed and being responsive. One of the biggest complaints we get in family law is that attorneys are not responsive. And this is often the first and only time people are going through a divorce, and the whole process can seem like a mystery. So I do think it's critical to let people understand what the process is, what the timetables are, and to be responding to their emails and calls, even if it's information you don't want to relay. You got to keep people informed.
Nice. All right, now it's your turn. So I'm going to put up the picture for you to pick an emotion from the list. And then you're going to share why you picked that emotion and then insert it into the same question. How can you help your client feel that word during their divorce process?
Yes.
Can you see all the high energy on the right and all the low energy on the right, the green and the yellow? Can you see all of that?
Most.
Can you see it better now?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So take a look. We're going to stay on the right side, top, bottom, because the left side, top, bottom are emotions. Well, actually, we're going to do something different. You can choose from any of the colors. On the left side, we have high energy, low pleasantness emotions. High energy over here. Low pleasantness, low energy over here in the blue. High energy, high pleasantness in the yellow. High pleasantness, low energy on the right. So you could actually choose any, and I'm going to tell you why I'm changing this. You said you would prefer a client who is angry over a client who is sad. And so you might decide you want to choose something over on this side because it's better than clients that are very, very low on an emotional frequency scale.
A lot of clients come in anxious. That is also an emotion that we see all the time. Can I frame my question as what can you do as a practitioner to help clients who are anxious deal with their anxiety?
Oh, sure. Let's do it. So I want you to, now that we have that off the screen, restate your question for my future guest.
Okay. So often clients are quite anxious throughout the divorce process. What can you do as a practitioner to help clients who are anxious deal with their anxiety throughout this process?
Nice. Oh, I can't wait till they answer that one. All right. We've come to the end of this time together, Meredith. Thank you for sharing your insights and for the role you played in my personal journey. Today's conversation reminds us that emotions matter not only in the conference room, but also in the courtroom and the attorney-client relationship itself. And to the listeners, remember this truth as you move forward. What you feel before, during, and after your divorce matters for you, for your children, for the future you're building. And until next time, take care of your emotions because they are worthy and so are you. Meredith, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me.